Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment Part 3, and this is Session 10. We were looking at that phrase, called according to His purpose. And if we've been called according to His purpose, then that means He's already been thinking about a couple of things. He's been thinking about that purpose, and He's been thinking about those He would utilize in that purpose, because that next phrase says, for whom He did foreknow, not what. And so we know that there are persons involved in that. And we know that the purpose is to have us labor with Him in His business. But listen, that laboring with Him in His business, I want to say something to you about that. We know we're going to deliver the creature from the bondage of corruption. We know it was made subject to vanity, and that's going to have to be changed. We know all that. But don't you know that when God created the creature, He created it for another purpose than just being made subject to vanity? He created that creature to do something. And, well, it is going to glorify Him. That is going to be the result of that. And as we are out there, we're going to be involved in more than just repairing all that Satan has done and making it all right again. Then we're going to go back and start doing those things that if there had been no rebellion in the first place, what would have been going on? And we're going to go back and get involved in. That's the laboring that we're going to be involved in. And that means that when the last part of Satan's strongholds have been torn down, and when we've reversed all the effects of the bondage of corruption, that we're going to labor with Him in the ages to come, long after, I know it's hard to believe this, Satan has passed out of your memory. Because there's going to come a time when he is not going to come into mind anymore. That's how focused we'll be on that which is happening, and how much time will elapse since Satan did what he did. Now, here's the point that I'm going to make, and this will get us right back on track. At that time, when God determined all of this, He had a purpose that included educated, equipped, and capable sons and daughters who would participate in running His business. And they would participate to such an extent that they could actually take over the running of it. Those are the sons and daughters who are the called according to His purpose. And I'm looking at this, but that's not verse 28. Maybe I've got it out. There it is. There's verse 28. So that's what I'm talking about. When I had that chair up here in the last session, I was saying, He wants you to sit in His seat and look at it from His standpoint. Well, Linda came up at the break, and she said something very insightful. So I'm giving her credit for it. Although I think she got it from someone else. I'm not really sure. But when you look at that, let me back that up to where that was. Remember how we did verse 28? And we know as sons that all things work together for good for sons, to them who are, to them that love God as sons. Remember we did that? She said, then if we're looking at it from the Father's perspective, it would be, for whom He did foreknow as a father, He also did predestinate as a father to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom He did predestinate, them He also called as a father, and whom He called, them He also justified as a father, and whom He justified, them He also glorified as a father. Well, that's exactly right. We're supposed to look at that from His point of view in what He was doing when He put all of this together for the purpose He was trying to achieve. And so that's really what this terminology is doing. It's guiding your thinking. It's guiding your thinking back to when He first put all this together. And the confidence that you're supposed to have comes from the fact that when He knew about some things ahead of time, it's because before any of us were ever here, He had already planned it all out. And it's almost like He had this blueprint where everything is in place. It's a master plan that He's going to follow. And all that we need to do now is know that everything we're going to need in that master plan has been provided for. And He's the one that's done that. And that is so that we can fulfill a purpose that He had from the beginning. And that's what moves our thinking from just being a son who's involved in some stuff to really seeing this from our Father's point of view. So by stating verse 28, that last phrase of verse 28, the way that He does, He's really giving us that perspective so that we can see it the way He sees it. And so when verse 29 comes along now and says, for whom He did foreknow. By the way, for whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate. Those are the first 2 of 5 steps you needed Him to provide for. You needed Him to know about some things, and you needed Him to predestinate. You needed Him to call. You needed Him to justify, and you needed Him to glorify. You needed all 5 of those steps to take place in order for you to be able to be and do all the things His purpose is going to call you for. And so I'm not going to tell you that there's nothing else He didn't do. There are other things that He did. But those are the 5 major steps that you're going to be taking a look at here that are supposed to give you the confidence and prove to you that what He said in verse 28 is absolutely true. And when He set all that in motion, I just want to recall what we talked about in the last session. There were no sons as yet. As a matter of fact, when He did that, there wasn't even a program with Israel in motion. That would take someone to say, well, then what God did in eternity past, it doesn't matter when He did it. He did it before any sons came along, but it doesn't matter when before. If it was important, guess what? Paul would have told us about it, but he doesn't. And so it doesn't matter when. So to get involved in a debate about when God decided this is to really get off track from the thing that He's trying to teach us about. Okay, so now here's what I want us to do. Let's begin to take a look at this and kind of dissect verse 29. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose, for whom He did foreknow. He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. When he starts with that word for, that is one of those English words of logic that sets your thinking in a particular way. And that for is a for of further explanation. In other words, he's made a statement in verse 28. He's qualified who that statement is about. And now he's about to give you some additional details to explain some things about what was going on to prove that verse 28 was true. Now, I don't want to skip ahead here, but let me ask this question. If God has made the statement in verse 28 that He has, that all things work together for good, and we know who that's for, why is it that the first thing He now talks to you about is His foreknowledge? Something He knew about beforehand. Why is that the first thing that He would talk to you about? And we're going to answer that question, but I want you to be thinking about that for a moment. Because, as we said last time, He's not the only one that can know about something before it actually happens. A wise father not only can, but should know about some things before they take place. So, what is it that our Heavenly Father thought about before we were ever born? Well, here's where His thoughts were. for whom he did foreknow, tells us that his thoughts were on sons who met the qualifiers of the previous verse. It was on sons who were going to be engaged in the sonship education. Now, I told you that it was not important for him to know. When we see that word foreknow, you think, oh, that God knows who that is. He knows everything about them. He knows how many there is. He knows all of that. He is God. He can know all of that. But he doesn't need to know that in order to do this. That's the point I'm trying to make. Because if you force that into he has to know all of that, you're paving the road for Calvinism. And I know what that's about. So what I'm saying is, here's the way I want to illustrate it. When I was a kid, we got a new sofa. And my dad said, I know how to get rid of the old sofa. So he put it out by the curb, and he put a sign on it that said, free sofa. And I said to my dad, do you really think someone will pick that up? And you know what he said? I know they will. Did he know who? Wasn't important, was it? Did he know all about them? Didn't know a thing about them. He didn't need to. But sure enough, later, I look out the front window and it's gone. He knew that's all it took. Well, your father, now that's a really bad illustration, but he knows, it's not that he knows Bob Butler is going to be saved one day and Bob Butler's like this. He doesn't need to know. All he needs to do is, and Randy put that beautifully in the last session, he planned to have sons who would labor with him. It doesn't matter who they are. That's all he needs to know. And so whoever they are, here's what he provided. And then you get these things that are listed in verses 29 and 30. Now, I want to illustrate this another way. Some guys get together and they're building an office building. As they're building this office building, they're building it according to a blueprint. That blueprint has been laid out ahead of time, and it knows it's going to accommodate this many workers. It knows it's got to have these kinds of offices. They know ahead of time, they plan. You've got to have bathrooms. You've got to have a men's restroom and a women's restroom. There's got to be a break area. There's got to be a parking lot. We've got to have plugs. We've got to have lights. All of that gets planned out ahead of time. And when they build, they're building according to that blueprint. Do they care about knowing the individuals that are going to occupy those offices? No, they don't. And they don't need to. The only thing I'm pointing out is we do this kind of thing all the time. Regular people do this kind of thing. I don't want that. I'm trying to get us away from the thinking that makes us take these things and prescribe them back to God's omnipotence. That doesn't have to happen. This is really a normal, natural way of conducting all kinds of affairs. God mapped this out ahead of time. He knew exactly what he needed. And before any of those sons were ever around, he just counted on them being there. All right, one last example. And we started talking about this at the end of the last session. When you hear that a baby is on the way, you start making preparations. And people do things. For instance, a young couple that's about to have a baby, you know what they think? We got to figure out where we're going to live because the school district we're in is not a good one. Have you ever known people that decided where they were going to live based on school district? Sure. Sure. And so, what are they thinking about when they do that? They're thinking about their child's education. Do you think your father was thinking about your education? See, all of this can be fit right into the parameters of a normal life. You can see that. Now, one of the things he doesn't do that sometimes parents do is, parents, you know, they're kind of young and crazy, and then when kids come along, you know what they say? I got to get my act together. And I'm going to be a parent. Now I got to be responsible. I've known people that used to be really wild, that when their first child was coming, they lost all their friends because they cleaned their act up and straightened themselves up, and they weren't near as much fun to hang around by their old crowd standards as they used to be, and they lost all their old friends. There's other things that happen to you. When you start being a parent, you can't stay up after 11 o'clock because you're just dead. In the old days, you used to stay up till 2:30 and still get up and go to work. Oh, well, I don't know how that works. Anyway, my point being that you start thinking about things. Things start changing for you, and you start looking at it differently. Now, your father didn't have to get his act together because he knew he was going to have sons, but the point I'm making is that he did make plans with sons and daughters in mind, and did the very things that earthly parents would do. Now, let's take this further, because this is what we don't do today. Suppose that you do have the family business, and when you hear that a child is on the way, a father in the Hebrew culture, or let's just say anyone in a culture that understood biblical adoption and practiced it, they wouldn't just be thinking, oh, we need to get a nursery room ready. What would they be thinking? This may be the one that gets trained to take over the family business. Do you know do you remember when the normal adoption ceremony took place? About 12 years old. You know what that means? At least 12 years before that child is adopted, the father has already been thinking about that. And that means he's been thinking about things before they ever happened. Does he know all about the child? No. Doesn't know what their personality is. In those days, he wouldn't know if it was a son or daughter. But guess what? It didn't matter. Either one could be the adopted child. So the only thing he's thinking is, I've got to start making arrangements here for the time when someone's going to come into the, this adopted son or daughter is going to come into the family business. Here's your Heavenly Father. He's determined that He's going to have sons or daughters, and they're going to labor with Him. So He's saying, I've got to make a provision for them to be educated. Now take this back to verse 28 for a second. You know what He's going to do? He's going to have you take, remember what Linda said in the last session? It's not the all things together alone. The all things work together with the sonship curriculum. And that's true. So here's what He has planned. I'm going to make it so that everything that happens to you, good or bad, is going to work in conjunction with your sonship education to train you and give you experience that you're going to need when you get into the heavenly places. How complete is that? It doesn't matter what it is that happens, it's all going to work together with your education to produce a good, a benefit, a training experience. Something that's going to allow you to do more than you would have done without it. How complete is that? That's just remarkable when you think about it. And that's what He's trying to get you to see, is that all of that was planned before you ever came along. It was already mapped out. And that's what the word foreknow is talking about. He knew He was going to have sons and daughters, and He knew He wanted them to labor with Him. So He made a provision. And so for those that are going to do that, that's great. He doesn't need all that other stuff to make all the plans that He wanted to make. Well, when He has this purpose, and we've already talked about what that is, He laid out everything in connection with that purpose. And as I said to you the last time, and I want to just reiterate, even if He, and I'm not saying He can't know, of course He's God and He can know, but knowing it doesn't change anything. He wouldn't have done anything different. If He'd have been looking at Bob Butler and said, it's Bob Butler, He's still not going to, He's not going to change what He's done. You see? What He's done is going to be the same no matter what. Now, maybe I'm beating a dead horse on that, but He has done everything that any of us will need in order to be successful. That's the way He foreknew. And that's the point that I'm trying to make with regard to that word. Now, this verse, for whom He did foreknow. Now, before I do the predestinate, He's invested a lot into, well, He's thought about some things ahead of time. He's planned for some things ahead of time. And He's done some things. He has planned to take you through, when you go through childhood, and then the adoption process, and then the education. When He put all of that together, it was completed. I'm still not going to say this the way I want to say it. No. Without failing to take any contingency under consideration, He has totally and completely provided for everything from the beginning, so that no adjustments had to be made as the dispensation of grace played itself out. He didn't get caught by surprise at any point, because everything that would ever need to be done was accounted for and provided for. That's the wisdom of your Heavenly Father that should make you... I tried to think of an illustration for this. If you ever bought a car, when you get in it, you just expect certain things to be in it, don't you? In the old days, air conditioning, remember when air conditioning was optional? Can you even buy a car anymore without air conditioning in it? I don't think you can. Not in Texas. Do they make them anywhere?
I don't think so.
I tell you what's in every car, a heater. Can you imagine getting in a car and not having a defroster? Well, in Texas, you would never use it. It's like Bertha and her windshield wipers. She's had that car for months. She said she got to use the wipers for the first time. The other day, she didn't even know if they worked. Well, if you get in that car, you just expect certain things to be there. And if it wasn't there, it would have been a mistake. Someone would have overlooked something. Your Father wants you to be able to get in the car and know that everything that you're going to need is right there, right where it's supposed to be. Again, not a perfect illustration, but kind of makes the point that I'm for some reason trying to struggle to make here. Well, you know, He does. He wants us to have an absolute confidence in what He's doing. An unwavering, beyond the shadow of a doubt confidence. But He designed for us to go through that childhood. He designed for us to be adopted. He designed for us to think like Him, be educated to think like Him, and to conduct ourselves like Him, so we would be equipped and capable to fulfill His purpose, and that is to labor with Him in what He's doing. He planned to have sons and daughters for that particular purpose, and He took everything into account when He did that. So what He's trying to do, my understanding anyway, of what's going on in these verses is that He is trying to get us to think about what He has done with us is not that much different from what a normal father who was looking to educate a son or daughter in his own business would be doing with them. It's not that... And even if you don't have a family business, isn't it natural for parents to want to put their own wisdom in their kids? That they would have the benefit of what you've learned in a lifetime. Of course, the problem is everybody wants to learn it the hard way. I get it. We want to learn it the hard way, our kids want to learn it the hard way, and our grandkids will want to learn it the hard way. But when you look at his business, does it ever occur to you, could he run that business on his own? Did he need you or me? No. So it's not like if we didn't do it, it just couldn't be done. He could very easily do it on his own. He has not only, though, decided that he would give us a part in the business and an inheritance in the business and a glory in relation to that business, but he gets something out of that too. When we get over into the further epistles, we discover that he has an inheritance in us. And by allowing us to have a part in that business, he gets glory from that as well. This is a pretty remarkable thing. This is a pretty amazing thing in the way that he has set it up. Now, he didn't have to do it to include us, but, and I'm going to say it this way, but I don't know how to detail it for you. We're going to get not just the privilege of engaging in the business with him, we're going to get to enjoy the business with him. And I know that's an odd word to use because the way most people view work, and we've talked about labor with him, and you hear that word labor, people don't think about enjoy, but it really is going to be that. That's something we haven't talked about too much. But when you're working in that business, look, I had a guy call me up on the phone, and he was offering me, we've had these calls before, but he was offering me one of these vacation packages. And we're going to pay your way to go to this resort, and, you know, we're going to put you up in this hotel, and, you know, we're going to give you these tickets to these shows, and we're going to, you know, and he was all that, and he said, you know, and I said, look, I'm really not your target audience. I'm really not your guy. You should probably spend your time talking to somebody else. And he said, but don't you take a break from what you're doing? And I said, well, you have to understand, I really love what I'm doing. I don't ever get up going, I'd sure like to take a break from studying about sonship. That never happens for me. I said, I just love what I'm doing. He said, what do you do? I said, well. So I started to tell him, you know, and then he needed to get off the phone for some reason. But really, the guy did say, well, you know, if you're serving the Lord and you love it, you know, then okay. And then, you know, he just hung up, you know, and I'm sure made his next call. But I know the way people, you know, he was counting on the fact that I'm working a job that I just hate. And I'm not. I love this. I know for other people, they're thinking, lock myself up and study all week long, just shoot me now. But I love that. I mean, I'm just sitting in my office drinking tea. You think I'm working. This is great. But it's really, look, everybody would be a preacher if they just knew how easy it was. The point is, I just love what I'm doing. I do. And with sonship, it's even more than ever before. But whatever it is you're going to be doing up there, you're going to enjoy that more than anything you've ever done down here. You just have to know that's going to be the way it is. I joke about somebody's got to muck out the horse stalls. And she didn't think I heard, but last week I heard Nancy mumble, I'll do it. Because she likes horses, you know, but here's my point. Whatever it, I know some of you are thinking, I do not want to muck out the stalls. But what you do, you're going to enjoy. It is heaven after all. This is not God's way of punishing you without sending you to the lake of fire. He's not just trying to get through the technicalities so He can still make your life a drudgery every day for eternity, so that you can't wait till you get off work. You're going to love what you do. You're going to live to do that. And I know people that think if they're not bass fishing every day in eternity, they're just going to be miserable. But however much fun they had bass fishing, when they get up into the creature and get involved in their family, in their Father's business, it's going to change for them. It's that much of a change. And it really is going to be something that we're going to love and that we're going to want to work at. And it's going to be a thrill to be involved in. And it's not going to get old. And as the ages unfold, we'll be looking at things we not only never knew before, but until they came up, we didn't think about before. It's not going to be boring, and it's not going to be drudgery. And you're in a body that never gets wore out. It never gets sick. It never feels bad. Never has a bad day. I mean, isn't that wonderful? My whole point is that He didn't just enjoy that on His own. He's made a way for us to enjoy that with Him, to be a part of that. That's His plan to do that, is how He foreknew you. And that's the point that I'm trying to make about that. All right. Is there any question at this point about verse 28 or the first part of verse 29? So if I were to say to you, how did God foreknow you? You would understand that it doesn't mean that He looked down through time and picked you out, but that what He did was He determined that He was going to have sons labor with Him. That's how He foreknew them. And then He put together the whole plan structure of how He would incorporate them into that work, how He'd educate them. And in His wisdom, here's part of what He did. I have made arrangements so that everything that happens to you, good, bad, or indifferent, is going to work toward your training for when you get up there to fulfill my purpose. I just think of that, and I just think of the wonder of that. So nobody has any question about that. So you'd be ready to move on to the very next part of the verse then. Gloria says you're ready. And you do realize, by the way, when we get these done, when we get verses 28, 29, and 30 done, the next thing that happens, those questions are meant, once that gets established, those questions are meant to come along and probe your thinking to make sure that you don't have anything in your mind or in your heart that causes you to doubt that that is so. They'll expose any of that. Now, for some of you, there'll be questions in there you'll breeze right through. For other folks, they'll look at that and, there'll be something that'll be dealt with. All of that will happen individually. But I'm really bringing this up because all of this is pointing you to this. Those 5 questions. Now, by the way, did you do the homework? Okay. Bertha went. At least she's honest. The dog didn't eat your homework, huh? Okay. Well, there goes that excuse. Did you look at those 5 questions to determine why 3 of them had answers and 2 of them did not? Did anybody figure that out? Those 5 questions have to do with 5 hurdles or 5 problems that you're going to encounter. The first 2 of those questions did not have any answer after them. And that's because those are just hurdles that are in general. Those last three questions have to do with specific obstacles that you're going to have to be able to overcome in your sonship life. So when you read those last three questions, you get answers because they're addressing them. The fifth one is Satan and his policy of evil. When it says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then it lists those 7 things, starting with tribulation and ending with sword. That is talking about the opposition that is given to you by Satan and his policy of evil. When he talks the question before that, who is he that condemneth? Well, think about this. Let me just turn over to Romans 8 here. Romans 8, take a look at verse. The first question is, if God be for us, who can be against us? That question, by the way, let me talk about sense and sequence right here. These are given to you in the order of which one you face the most frequently. So when it says, if God be for us, who can be against us? What's the opposition of that? That's your flesh. That's the you. That's the part that's going to give you the most problem. Do you know why? You'll deal with that flesh every single day till the day it's redeemed. Every single day, that'll be the thing that you'll deal with no matter what. You may not face the policy of evil every single day. You will face your flesh every single day. That's why you're, yes?
Is that question 1 or is that question 3?
That's question, well, it is the third question, but it's the first one. I'm sorry. Let me back you up. Let's start. I started you at the end, didn't I? And then I swapped to the front. Let's do this. Verse 35. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? That is the policy of evil. Who is he that condemneth? Verse 34. Who is that?
World.
That's the world. Because Paul is going to talk about not being condemned with the world, remember? And then the one, as you work up from that, who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? I should not have written that there. Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? Now the answer is what? It's you. It is you. Why would the Bible say you're the one that would lay anything to the charge of God's elect? He's talking about you, but why would you oppose yourself on that? Have you ever come to a place where you have said, look, I just don't think God can use me because I keep getting this wrong. I keep failing. Because we're looking at it from that standpoint. Remember in the old days, you had to confess your sins and clean yourself up and ask God to forgive you and then start fresh. And then you'd mess up and you're supposed to come back and do all that process again and again. And then what happens one day? One day you go, I know he's getting sick and tired of this and he's probably not even listening to me because he knows I'm just going to mess up again. And and then you feel guilty. Remember that? You'd feel guilty and then you'd want to... Well, that's the condemning that takes place. That's what's being talked about there. And I probably shouldn't have got off on this, but what I was trying to do is not lose track of where this is all pointing. 28, 29, and 30 are going to establish the truth of verse 28, but then these 5 questions are going to come along and say, you've got some things that you've got to make sure that you have the answer to or that you can overcome that are coming your way, and you've got to be prepared for those. And those are the things that will cause you to doubt the truth of what is being told to you. And so we have to work through all of that And then at the end of that, it's supposed to produce a full persuasion that what your Father has said to you is true. Where are we? Oh, brother. Okay. Well, I forgot to turn this on. I'm saying we still have 46 minutes. We have 4. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come, when we come back, we're going to take these words. I don't look, let me talk to you about my fear, and you tell me what you think. My fear is, if I don't drill this over and over, it will just pass right over your head and you won't get it. That's my fear. But sometimes when I'm up here and I'm looking at what I thought was exactly what we needed to see, sometimes it looks like, I think we got that. Go to the next one. So I'm thinking what let's do is, let's move through all of these words and let's just get them all done. And then, but I need to exact this commitment from you, that really and truly, when we get through with these 5 words and get them done, if there's anything you're not sure of, you will say it when I ask at the end of it. That way we don't spend longer on it than we have to, but I'll have the assurance that if it's not clear for anybody, then when you say it, that you will say it so I can address it. Is there anybody not willing to make that commitment? So everybody is willing to say, if I don't get it, I'll let you know, no matter how shy or introvert you are. Sarita. I know some of you are introvert, but you'll ask. But I'm just, Loopy, you'll ask? All right, I had to put her on the spot like that. If you could turn the cameras back to Loopy so everybody could see. No. Okay, if I get that assurance, then we're going to start moving through these words and covering the ground more quickly. I'm just always afraid, and well, there's reasons why. Teresa?
When do we not ask?
I hear this sometimes. I hear this. When you got through with the session, I was really confused. And I had to go home and go through the notes, and which is good. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But I had to go through the notes twice and listen to the DVD again, and then I got it. What scares me about that is that somebody went out the door confused about something, and I had no idea. I know, but interactive learning. If you don't understand, you got to say something. Although I'm really grateful that someone says, "Well, let me go." So if you ever do that, look, I'm not chiding you at all about that, but if you go home and you still don't get it, you know what you have to do. You have to come back and go, "Look, I went home and I listened and I still don't get it." You've got to do that. As long as I get that commitment, I can start moving us through this quicker. All right. Well, then that's what we'll do. So we'll start moving on through the material. And you're happy, right, with that? If somebody asks a question, we all just hear the answer, and because we want everybody to get it, and then we'll move on from there, right? Okay, then. Now I feel better about it. Because today, I got to tell you, I felt like I was whipping the same horse for the last 40 minutes. And it looked like overkill. It didn't when I put it together, but looking at you while I'm doing it, it's like you got it 20 minutes ago.
Mike, when I started putting my book together,
Yeah?
there's a lot of stuff that looks like you can put it, cut, paste this paragraph, put it in the next one. So I just started making big X's. Where reading is a little easier, just the concepts.
Well, you know, yeah, plus, let me tell you this. When you get to the end of sometimes we don't do all the notes. So what's at the end of those notes becomes the first of the next set of notes that are actually in there twice. But if you look at them, I've tweaked them a little bit the second time because I thought, you know what, here's a better way to do this. So they change up a little bit, but not much. So, yeah, there's a lot of repetition that way. Well, okay, I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to start moving a little quicker.
What are 1 and 2? You said they're just general on the questions, the obstacles that we got to go through.
Yeah, those two questions, that is your flesh, by the way. I just put it in the wrong spot. Because you are going to have to deal with that. That's not you condemning yourself. That's your flesh rising up. And you're going to deal with that. That'll be a good homework assignment. Where's that other question? See, if God be for us, who can be against? He that spared not his own son, but let's see, I'm sorry. Let's see, who will separate us from the love of Christ? Who is he that condemneth? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? What is that obstacle? Just kind of read through. Because we're going to go through these things quickly, we're going to be on these questions real quick. So I need you to get real familiar with them. Start reading through those and look at those and thinking about those and I have it in the notes. Think about the words that you're looking at, the meaning of those words. Think about the order in which you're being presented with information. And keep it within the context of your sonship. Don't get lured out from that. And see what you can start determining about that. This is a good thing. I know it's a very important thing and a critical thing. This is going to be a good thing for us to go through because it finishes off this part of our establishment. Sooner we get this done,